Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. Now, let's get the program started in earnest. On Wednesday, the federal government suspended its plan to reopen schools for graduating students, which it had announced earlier in the week, and also stopped students from writing the WAEC, West African Senior School Certificate Examinations, better known as WAEC, which was earlier scheduled for August 4th to September 5th. The federal government stated that it would prefer an academic year to be lost than to expose students to the coronavirus pandemic. So let's look at this together this morning. We have joining us via Skype Titus Ibekwe, Professor of Otorhinolaryngology. Oh, that word again. Did I get it right?
You got it. You got it.
Good morning, Professor. We also have Dr. Adefeso Olateju, the education part of the Education Partnership Center, also joining us via Skype. Good morning. Okay. And with us live in the studio is Professor Abiola Awoshika, President and CEO of Oasis. Good morning, Prof. In parentheses, what does Oasis stand for?
It's Olawonya Awoshika, School of Innovative Studies.
School of Innovative
Studies.
Studies.
In memory of my father.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Now, let me begin with Dr. Adefeso Olateju. Can you hear us, by the way? Because we didn't hear you when we came to you just now. Can you hear us?
No, we still can't hear him.
Well, we can't. Can you say something to us, please? Good morning.
Okay. I think they're still working on that.
Okay, let me start with the person we have in the studio with us live, Professor Awoshika. In the course of at the beginning of the week, the task force announced, last week actually, that school leaving classes were going to resume to be able to take their exams. And then this week, it reversed itself and said that it was not time to open any schools or sit any exams. What's your take on that in light of our circumstance right now?
Well, I think we have to think of the safety of the children first. It's one thing to say the Minister of Education went back on his words, but when you look at the logistics, a lot of these schools are boarding schools. So where do you keep your children at that time? How do you know they're going to be taken care of? I've seen several surveys now, even in the last 2 days that this decision was made. And a lot of the parents don't want their kids to be in school at this time because of the uncertainty. We really don't know what this coronavirus is doing. First, it wasn't airborne. Now it's airborne, and we really and because Nigeria is not testing that much, and because of the behavior of children, because you're not going to be able to restrain them not to play, not to touch each other, even at that age. At the primary, so they have
first school leaving,
first school leaving, and then secondary, and it's just it's unsettling.
Yes.
And so I think a lot of people would say, yes, let's just wait a while.
Dr. Adefeso Olateju, are you with us now? On social media, some parents were kicking that they wanted their children to go and do these exams. They didn't want their children to waste any time, so to speak. But somebody else was quick to respond that when they finish this exam, they're supposed to go somewhere and that somewhere is not even open. So what's the hurry?
Olateju, I don't know if you can unmute yourself because I can't hear you. She's coming to us via Zoom. Dr. Adefesa Olateju, can you hear us? Okay, she can't hear us, so let's get to Prof. Ibekwe.
Okay, Prof.
No,
Professor Ibekwe. Prof, can you weigh in on that, please? You know, the parents who are complaining that they want their students to go back to school, they don't want them to lose any time, maybe up to a year. But government is saying better to have children alive than to have them do exams and know where to go and probably dead from the coronavirus.
Yes, you know, it's always good when analyzing issues to take it from a balanced perspective. There are some pros and there are some cons when you look at the issue of outright cancellation of these exams or just opening our floodgates and saying that our children should get back to school. We must get it right because COVID-19, as we know, by every intent and purpose, it is a disease that you have to protect life and you also protect livelihood. That's how you do it, and you have to strike a balance. And that needs a lot of hard work. Our children have to be alive first, but again, their future is equally very important to each and every one of us. And I think that's why the federal government, at a time, the Ministry of Education took time to come up with some measures that if these measures, you know, obeyed strictly down to letters, then we may be able to take in our children to write exams. But very importantly is to know that the incidence in COVID-19 is on the rise on a daily basis. Now, on average, we're almost getting to 700 on average per day. And as I said, if we continue in this trajectory, we may get to 1,000 per day, despite the fact that we're not testing full capacity yet, and we're having this. So that speaks volume that the community transmission is real. And unfortunately, as we can see, it appears we're not obeying the rules and regulations strictly. But if you look on the other side of this discussion, I think we can make some good modifications and these children could write their exams, okay? If we have to phase this, and by phasing, I mean only the final years, the senior students, that's SS3, could be accommodated if rules and regulations have to be obeyed strictly in our various institutions. Let's not forget that we're talking of WAEC here, and the other Anglophone countries, the other 4 Anglophone countries are gearing up to go ahead and write the exams. Ghana already admitting their own final year students. So we may take a swipe at dropping the idea of primary school or even JSS3 coming in and focusing on SS3 alone. That means that for a facility that used to accommodate or take care of certain number of students, you are using that to handle just 1/6 of these students. And bearing in mind that the final year students, SS3 students, are adolescents transforming to adults. It will be easier for them to be able to obey instructions. You know, okay. When you compare to
Professor Ibekwe, I would have to interrupt you briefly. We need to go on a very quick break. We'll come back and you can pick it up from that point where you left up. Please join us. Thank you for staying with us. Professor Ibekwe, you were saying something about what needs to be done. Okay, well, Professor Adefeso Olateju, I understand we have you now. The question Alera asked you earlier, why do you think there appears to be this pressure to open up the schools?
Great, thank you very much. It's good to be on the program this morning. I hope you can hear me now. There is a pressure for schools to reopen simply because parents and families understand that there is a formal pathway through which their children will attain academic success. The reality is that the COVID pandemic has brought into sharp focus this dichotomy in our society between schooling and learning. And it would appear from my own reading of the situation globally as it unfolds that the COVID-afflicted and post-COVID world would benefit more from people who are at this time developing critical skills, who are learning critical skills that are both academic and social and emotional, and not just academic. And so I think that the discussion is really between schooling and learning. And unfortunately, it shouldn't be so. And so parents know that for their children to progress, for example, to university entrance examinations, they do need to have, for example, a WIEC certificate. But the question is, do we need to continue to think about our examinations and assessments the way that we have always done? And the reason I say this is because I think of curriculum and assessment as being two sides of the same coin. And so when we want to assess learning, the question is, have children learned? What have they learned? And that really should drive the assessment. You also have some instances where assessments can drive the curriculum. And when you find out what children are learning, you use that to structure what they should be learning in the future. Do we have that synergy between our assessment and our curriculum? And that, for me, is really at the heart of why this issue is important. We want children to obviously progress in their academics, but at the same time, we want them to stay safe. So no easy answers. And I believe that when you're planning as an education sector, you cannot have all your variables shifting and moving at the same time. There must be one static variable around which we build and plan. And for me, that variable is learning. And so if at this time we decide to shift our attention to what sort of knowledge and skills and competencies do we want our children to possess for them to live healthy, happy lives, productive lives in our society, and globally competitive lives, then let that be our focus and let us begin to build structures, curriculum structures, assessment structures, technology structures around that critical mandate.
You are of the education partnership. Do you think a lot will be lost if the students in examination years don't proceed with their examinations? Because strictly speaking, even when they have passed those exams, there's nowhere they're going because those occupying those places they want to go to have not been able to finish their curriculums and graduated.
The reality is that these key stage examinations that we're referring to, and specifically WIEC, yes, certainly are a gateway, to higher education. But we would also remember that for children to get to the point where they are ready to write an examination, a lot has happened over the last 1 year. They have spent and invested a lot of their time in studying, in reflecting, in preparing for these examinations. And so you can understand why children and their families would be disappointed that they don't have the opportunity to prepare to write an examination which they have prepared for. We can appreciate that. Whether the schools that are to receive them are open is another matter and another conversation that we still need to have. For me, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Are we prioritizing learning? Are we even reflecting on what is happening globally and internationally? The courses that WIEC, for example, assess, the competencies that WIEC assesses, do these remain the competencies in their entirety that are relevant for the kind of world that we live in? I think we have to start, whilst we ask the tactical questions, I think we really do need to shift our minds also to the more strategic issues so that we don't spend all of our time addressing the short-term concerns and then find at the end of the day that we're still moving in the same little challenging circle. So this is my perspective.
Zawashika, the short-term concerns, she's put out something, says the difference between learning and schooling, so to speak. It's like that's a major concern because there are those who are thinking, these children have been going to school, but have they really learned anything? Is it about the exams they're writing? Why do we continue to think exams are the best way to test the learning capability of our children? You think she's right in that?
She's absolutely right. The school curriculum has been, bastardized in the sense that we pick items to teach the children because we know the system that WIEC uses to test them. You have to have, in mathematics, there's a question on graphs, there's a question on, algebra. So they already permutated all of those things. And so they just teach to those topics. So the students have carried those things on their heads, and they're ready to dump it, regurgitate it in the exams. So we're worried. If the students were learning while in school, it shouldn't matter because it's the concept that you're trying to teach them. You can manipulate it any way you want, and they will get it. So we're not. We're encouraging teaching to the exam, teaching to the test, instead of actually finding out if students were learning the concepts we're teaching them. And we can examine them in several ways. It's not just sitting down and writing an exam. If I gave you an open book examination that allows you to use your books, you can research whatever topic. I give you a time limit, and I set the question such that it's not just define this and what list this and whatever what have you. You would find out that more students will demonstrate learning instead of what they have learned in school to pass examinations. So we need to rethink how we do school. We need to rethink what we let our students get out of the material that we're teaching them. We cannot we cannot afford the empty exam because I'm going to the university, university because I'm going to go out and get a job, which you can't get because you didn't learn the material in the first place. We have to actually rethink our curriculum and give the students the skills, 21st century skills that they need to survive. Critical thinking, communication, logical thinking, all of these are not examined.
Okay. Professor Ibekwe, yes, so right now the federal government has reversed itself. That fear that students are going to lose like one academic year. Do you think there's a way it can be taken advantage of to rework the curriculum so that we have more learning for practice or learning for living instead of learning for examination? Okay, let me ask that question again. Do you think this period that the schools are shut down and no exams whatsoever can be utilized to work on the curriculum so students begin to learn for life, learn for practice instead of learn for examination?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Sorry, there has been some connection and reconnection issue. But the thing here is, as you rightly said, my colleagues over there, I completely agree with their line of thought. But again, I believe in holistic problem solving. We can't solve a problem by evading part of it. We take it frontally. All it takes is for us to be able to get our acts right. These final years alone, as I was suggesting before you went on break, if we accommodate them, they should be able to write their exams. And we can go ahead and modify the format for writing exams and other things subsequently. But for now, it is too close, it is too short. Let's not forget that these children has just finished writing their JAM before now, and they are technically ready to take subsequent exams. And what does it take? I am talking from the perspective of a health personnel and also a teacher. You know, all it takes is for us to abide by these simple rules, which has been laid out. We utilize the space that is meant for a certain number of people for 1/6 of that number of students, and obey these critical rules. We should be able to do their exams. And we may have to limit the contact time. Instead of telling them to come and spend 1 month in school before exams, it may be 2 weeks. These students have been reading in anticipation, getting ready for exams, you know, so they should be able to do this exam. Coming back to our various schools, the teachers, the authorities, and we, the parents, will all have collective responsibilities to carry out here. Number one, before the children get back to school, we should be able to brand face masks that the names must be inscribed on, giving to them sets, 3 or 4 of that, so that, you know, children must be children at all times, so that don't misplay these things and interchange the face masks. You get them to school, you get the ground preparatory ready for them. Spacious enough because we have fewer numbers coming in. We space them for those who are meant to stay in the hostels, because definitely some of them will travel hundreds of kilometers to be able to get back to their schools. So for those who will stay in these boarding facilities, you spread them out to the entire boarding facilities in the school, and you will be able to achieve this desired physical distancing. Now, strategically, you place cleansing things within the schools. All the hostels, all the refectories, all the classrooms will all have this ready. Every morning, designated people, their teachers will have to check their temperature and the standardized things that they have to check and ensure and monitor them very closely that this spacing is maintained within this period. You stagger them across all the classrooms in the school. All the teachers should be involved in the revision, which is very desirable before the exams are written. So you do this, you achieve this distancing, it is easier to regulate. Then on the part of the schools, they ensure that strictly no visitors come in. Anybody that must come in must have a very serious business that is bringing him or her into the school. And the same, even their teachers has to be checked and monitored for their vitals, including their temperature and all those. They also involve in the respiratory hygiene, hand hygiene, and others, okay? In the classroom, we maintain all this. We can consistently do this for 2 weeks. Monitor our children, they write their exams. As I said, beautifully enough, it will concentrate only on SS3, which for me is the most critical as it is, since the other West African countries are going ahead with their exams, all right? So they cannot be left alone. They are old enough, so parents should be able to educate their children properly before they set out for those going to the boarding facility. For those that are taken to the schools to do this, it has to be done very, very carefully, and we can achieve that. In school, there has to be a holding area, which has to be mapped out. So these hold areas are places in case you have any child that manifests any symptom that is suggestive. Of course, haven't gone to the bay, you just place as the hold area. And there has to be regular contacts with NCDC or indeed any hospital within some kilometers within and around the institution. You have to be a good contact with them. Once you have any child manifesting that have such suspicious symptoms, is placed in this holding area. And of course, some of their teachers, especially those teaching health education and all those, must have been well trained within this period. You know, you do the contact.
Professor, this sounds like a logistics nightmare to me, just you talking about it. Because we know what these boarding houses are like. Double-decker beds, lying cheek by jowl. How do you sort all that out and have these students in so that they are safe? Or is it that during the period of the exams, the schools will decide that all those coming for the exams should come in as day students? All these things have to, you're talking about sanitizers and face masks in the schools. All these, the schools have to get ready. Are they prepared for all this so that these exams can go ahead as you're suggesting?
Alero, it is not possible for all the students to come as day to write their exams. You know what? Because some of them are living hundreds of kilometers away. For instance, you have a child staying in Lagos that is schooling in Abuja. The child has to come back. All right? For those staying in the boarding school, all we got to do is to concentrate on them. Those of them that are staying with their parents within and around where the schools are will have to stay with their parents. As I said, let's not forget that we'll be dealing with 1/6 of the capacity that normally these boarding schools carry. So it is very flexible and easy to be able to handle, to maintain the spacing. That is the nightmare that we're thinking of here. All right? When you stagger them across all the entire boarding facilities within the school, for the few that cannot come from their homes, those that travel long distances to come into school, we're able to send them and utilize all their teachers in the monitoring, in ensuring that these strict rules and regulations are maintained. It takes two to tango.
Okay, Professor Bekwe, I'll have to read this and then direct the question to Professor Washika. A parent is watching. Sam says, I'm a father with a child in examination class, in one of the examination classes. My child will not be going back to school soon until this pandemic is over. The risk is just too much. Professor Washika, Professor Bekwe has talked about the need to train. He talked about training the teachers, especially those that are teaching health education and physical education, and then managing the students. There will be room. Mr. Festus Akimbewa says there will be rooms for social distancing in these schools if only the examination classes come. But you don't look like you agree with this.
Well, it's scary. We've been talking about the students. We haven't talked about the teachers. With underlying conditions, any exposure will get them in deep trouble. A lot of these teachers have not been paid in the last how many months. It's just not right. You have to provide sanitizers and hand washing station and thermometers and everything. These things cost money. No help has been given the education sector. Now you suddenly want them to come in and now take over, and they will. I know a lot of those teachers. They love the students at heart, and they want to do the job. They will, but is it fair on them? Is it fair health-wise? I mean, it takes only one child to catch it and die. And, for us to have a whole lot of mess on our hands. Just one child. That, this child, he was there for an examination, caught the virus, and is dead.
It's not even that. We were talking on the COVID-19 studio, one of the times, we were talking to a pediatrician who talked about the fact that children most times are asymptomatic. They don't show the symptoms, but they carry this, and it's easier for them to transmit it to the adult and all of that. So in that kind of situation, what do we do?
Well, we just stay away from it. That's what I mean. It sounds very beautiful, the way Professor Bekwe has put it, and we might. But when you think of Ghana and all other West African countries, how many students do they have?
Okay, let's leave that. Let's just hold on to that question. We'll look at how many students and what is the way forward. What's the best solution to go with the three academicians we have in the studio? We'll come back from this break. Thank you for staying with us, and we still have the academics. All the three of them are here. Larry, you wanted to read something?
Yes, Adekunle Yusuf says, I guess the Professor Ibekwe is just speaking theoretically. All he has said is not possible practically. Transmission will skyrocket I was expecting him to suggest a digital approach instead.
Well, Festus Akimboewa says, so if the coronavirus is still with us by this time next year, does it mean that the kids will have to lose 2 years? Can't we trust our children to do the right thing if properly instructed? Dr. Olateju, Adefeso Olateju, this is, okay, let me say this is like a multi-headed question for you. So Professor Awoshike asked a question before we went on that break where she said, these other West African countries that are going ahead with their exams, what's the population? What's their student population? Can we compare what they have to the Nigerian student population? That's one. And then Festus' question where he says, so if the coronavirus stays with us till this time next year, the children will have to lose like 2 years. How do we get a balance in all of this?
Oh, great. Thank you for that question. I think that you're right in the in comparing, our population size, with that of other West African countries. I don't think there's much to be said there. I mean, Nigeria is so much bigger, than any of the other countries in question. But I think perhaps Nigeria is also not as prepared as some of the other West African countries to take on this monster, of learning during a pandemic, in the way that it should. That said, I do note that there have been fantastic, interventions and innovations from several state governments across the country and education innovators. We've just surveyed about 2,000 persons who've either been impacted by the virus in terms of learning or who are providing some sort of learning solutions. And the results are fascinating. But I do think that, preparedness as a country is how I would then answer your second question, which is what happens if the pandemic is still here next year? Well, chances are that it will still be here next year. But we need as a country to continue to strengthen our data collection and evidence generation strategies. It is so imperative. You see, in most of the other countries that are taking decisions to reopen the economy and also to have children come back to school. I think one of the most, popular examples was Denmark, in the earlier days of the crisis, and Israel, of course, was, having kids going to school and then, closing some of them down as they saw spikes. One thread runs across, and that is a dedication to data, collecting data, reviewing that data, learning from that data, and course correcting as we go along the way. You see, the reality is that I don't think that any reasonable Nigerian right now who is observing this pandemic and how it is playing out is going to expect its government to have all the answers. That's not possible. No one has all the answers. We've seen massive economies almost crumble under the weight of this pandemic. However, we do know that what we can develop is a capacity to watch the evolution. And for example, if we say we want kids to go back to school, have we even piloted this? Have we in real life seen what the effect could be if children decided to go to school? And then there are ethical issues around that as well, because when you're doing social research with minors, you really do have to ask these ethical questions again and again. Should we even pilot in the real sense? Whose children are going to be the guinea pigs? Who wants their children to be the guinea pigs? I think Prof. Awoshike has talked about, challenges around teachers, and some of the health issues that teachers may be facing that we don't even know about. Do we have data on this? You see, because all of this data, when we aggregate it, is what is really going to help us to innovate in a way that ensures that come next year, even if the pandemic is still with us, we would have created mechanisms of deploying the curriculum, of assessing the curriculum, and of tracking to see how that entire process is working. And so anyone who works in the space of data collection, evidence generation, strategy really does need to be invited to the table right now when it comes to policy making, so that we can use the evidence to make the decisions that will help us, to ensure that our children continue to learn at this time. So this is my perspective.
Now, Prof, suppose, because she spoke about, suppose this virus is still with us in 2 years, are schools going to remain closed for 2 years? I think the obvious answer to that is no, that we will have to work out some way for these children to go back to learning. Now, suppose the ministry gave guidelines. The schools must have this in place and that in place and that in place before the graduating classes can come in and sit their exams. Wouldn't that be something to work with instead of just because we haven't heard that the schools have been preparing for reopening?
Well, the schools have not been preparing for reopening, I can tell you that. Because, we talked about the students, we talked about a little bit about the teachers, we haven't spoken about the school owners.
Okay.
I mean, because they will have to bear the brunt of...
And spend the
That's
extra
for
money.
schools.
For private schools and
Yes.
even for public schools. For example, they're trying to go online now, public schools, Lagos State public schools. Mm-hmm. And they're teaching the teachers how to teach, but they can't get the students to come in. I mean, there are schools that have about 600 students on the roster, and only 2 showed up for an online class. Yeah, so the logistics is just horrible. I mean, a lot of these children public school children have gone to their, trades, helping their mom sell, buying and selling and all that. So they either didn't hear about it, or they just couldn't care less.
Or they don't have the means.
Or they don't even know how to go online.
Yes.
So we have to align everything that we're doing. If you say the schools should prepare yes, we can do that. Schools can do that. But when we went on break, forced break, before the final exam in the second term, mm-hmm. Some parents are still owing. They've refused to pay anything. There's no income coming in for the schools. So how does the school now prepare
spend
for the children?
Yeah.
Now we could say, all right, the WAEC age parents should fund this, but is it fair? Mm-mm. So it's all right now. It's unsettled, and we just need time. To like Dr. Mo said, we need time to learn how this thing is behaving, strategize, how we're going to react to it before we move on.
Okay, Professor Ibekwe, the issue of the school administration or management, and the teachers, that again, when you talk about having the students coming to write their exams, even though someone here is saying that you're doing your points are quite fantastic, but then somebody else is concerned about the fact that they thought you'd be preferring digital solutions. Because, first of all, the schools, how prepared are the schools to receive the students? Who is funding the preparations, both for the public and the private schools? Professor Awochika just give an example now of a school that had 600 students on their register. And then when they decided to go online, they had just 2 show up. Many of those children are back helping their parents or one thing or the other. Again, how prepared are these teachers to receive the students, or even to stay healthy enough to teach the students?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. You see, if you look at this trend of discourse, easy way out is to say, just shut down the school indefinitely until when coronavirus goes, all right? But if you want to take the uncharted course and take issues head on, you have to holistically consider all the options left for us. Online is a digital way of testing is desirable. But the reality is, how many of these children, how many of our institutions, have private to utilization of this online? Even the online lectures going on right now is very, very little percentage that have access to this. So that is not feasible. Then secondly, you talk of the teachers. Yes, the teachers have been taken into consideration in the point I was mentioning. That's why I said that responsibilities abound to each and every one of us. The teachers, they have to be well prepared. I said that they got to have some training, and they have to be checked and scrutinized, just as you're checking the students. when they are within school. And I say that limiting contact going forward is our thinking of, instead of the students coming to stay 1 full month in the school, considering 2 weeks, within this period, so that we can further get ready. As somebody just suggested in one of the mails you had, nobody knows how long this is going to be, because we have not even gotten to the peak. We have not had a plateau to start talking of going down before we talk of possibly when coronavirus is going to clear. So it is a load of responsibilities, which we should not be afraid to start preparing for. We have like 2-3 weeks left. Can we be able to put most of these things in place and look at how it pans out, And I said, let's de-emphasize the issue of primary coming on board. Let's de-emphasize the issue of JSS coming on board. The most critical, as we're speaking, is SS3. But if all this, after holistic assessment of this situation, we discover that we won't be able to meet up with this, then we should be able to persuade WAEC not to take this exam, because over 60% of candidates enrolled into these exams are Nigerians. So technically, we are using our funds to run WAEC. So I don't see a reason why the other African countries should be writing the exams and our children should be left in limbo. You see, it doesn't add up. We should all live up to our responsibilities. And if we do this...
So you say that you are concerned about SS3. Okay, they write the WAEC, and then what do they do thereafter? They're supposed to go into university, I assume. But universities are not even in session. They're not graduating anybody, so there'll be no vacancies open in the universities.
You have a point there, but at the same time, don't forget that there is a trend of thought. These children have been prepared and they've gotten to a stage of writing this exam. They have finished phase 1 of the exams, entrance into the universities, and they are technically ready to take the second phase of exam. I know that plan is on the way, considering when possible that the higher institutions could reopen. If everything is on ground and ready to go, and the students, they have all done their own part, and we discover that most of our institutions are not open, then they got to wait. But now they are better prepared to take these exams rather than you're delaying them ad infinitum while waiting for, the higher institutions to reopen. First and foremost, we can't put the cart before the horse. The students have to do their own part, take all their exams while waiting for higher institutions to reopen. As at when due, depending on how...
Prof, look, we're almost out of time, so let's just read this tweet so that the three of you can weigh in on this and we wind down. Ife Korede says, I wish you can see, he says, they refuse to open schools, but they can hold elections in Edo and Ondo states. Says every decision they make is for themselves, and that's not helping Nigeria. Dibara says, it's very funny that some of our discussions are sounding like government can't provide the conducive environment to a 1% of a people to go and take an external exam, which other African countries are prepared to take.
Wasborn says Israel tried to open schools and they had to beat a retreat as the pandemic skyrocketed. There's no need to put the children at risk. We have to be alive before we can talk about education. No school for my kids for now, he says.
Ayatunde Richard says boarding students should be allowed to write their exams in any secondary school close to their homes. We cannot stop our existence because of the pandemic. Life must go on. And finally, Otumba Elkana says, Nigeria seems not to be prepared. We're not a proactive nation. It's unfortunate. And let's start with you, Dr. Olateju. If you can weigh in on all of this as we begin to wind down. Way forward.
Thank you very much. I think that the way forward is for us to begin to recalibrate as a country. Recalibrate in the sense that we really do need to start asking ourselves very, very deep questions about where we see ourselves as a country in the future. There is a national planning exercise that is currently ongoing, and my hope is that it will continue to be as participatory, as it has started out, being. But the point is that for us to be at this juncture where we are asking whether we should administer an exam during a pandemic that seems set to kill more people than perhaps even our own civil war, I think we really do need to be very careful. At the same time, we also know that the reality is that within the context of, when we think about schooling is not just about helping children develop cognitive skills. Schools also serve as nannies. Schools serve as safe spaces. We know that the rise in, for example, sexual assault and rape and gender-based violence that we have seen during this period of the pandemic is very closely related to the fact that children don't have a safe space called school to go to. So this is a very complex situation that we find ourselves in. Countries that have gone through perhaps not as serious, but similar issues, for example, Sierra Leone during the Ebola time, will tell you that the reality is it is only consistently collecting useful data and using that data to think deeply about next steps. Can you reach the promised land? And I hate to speak vaguely, but the reality is that this is what we really need to be doing. In the short term, children writing WAEC or not writing WAEC should also help us ask ourselves very fundamental questions. Are these examinations simply for the purpose of regurgitating knowledge? Or are we truly testing what children need to be able to do, and not just know, to be able to do in a world like today? I think we really need to get to the heart of that matter.
Thank you very much, Professor Awosika.
Well, I don't think we're advocating that children don't do exams ad infinitum. I think what we're advocating is let's prepare. I didn't hear anything about, what space the children are going to use, how we're going to administer this exam. We just hear students are going to resume, and that's it. So we just need time in the short term to prepare for these children to come and take this exam, and we would need to see actually what the government or the schools have put in place in such a way that our children will be safe.
Thank
a lot
you.
of parents...
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
We have run completely out of time. Professor Abiola Awosika, President and CEO of OASIS, and we had joining us via Skype Professor Titus Ibekwe, Professor of Otorhinolaryngology, as well as Dr. Mo Adefeso Olateju, who's MD, the Education Partnership Center. Thank you all very much for coming to share your insights with us this morning.